Torquay Seafront, Wednesday afternoon, June 1953. Margaret Pearson, 34, of Edgbaston, Birmingham, wife of a bank manager, is seated at a wrought iron table on the terrace of the Roseter Hotel, in front of a pot of tea she did not have to ask for twice. She and her husband Geoffrey came down that morning on the Great Western Railway's Torbay Express from Birmingham Snow Hill, a service timed and priced for 3 decades to deliver families exactly like the Pearsons to hotels exactly like the Roseter. Their daughter is on the beach below with the girl the hotel had arranged for the fortnight. Margaret has not cooked a meal since Monday. She will not cook another until the second week of July. She chose this table on purpose. She chooses it every June. From here she can see the palm trees along the promenade, the yachts on their moorings in the harbor, and, if she turns her head slightly, nothing at all that reminds her of the branch where Geoffrey has spent the preceding 11 months. She has been coming to Torquay since her honeymoon in 1946. She did not go to Blackpool as a girl. She has never been. What, precisely, did the Roseter's terrace, the Torbay Express, and the palm-lined promenade below give Margaret Pearson that a fortnight in her own garden in Edgbaston could not? And what did choosing Torquay over Blackpool or Bournemouth tell the neighbors in Edgbaston about who the Pearsons understood themselves to be? Before you can understand what Margaret Pearson's table on the Roseter's terrace was doing for her, you need to understand what Torquay had spent a century building itself to be. The town's mild climate reputation began during the Napoleonic Wars, when the English elite, cut off from the continent, turned to the sheltered waters of Torquay instead, a resort born from the outset as a substitute for somewhere grander abroad. Through the 19th century, it grew as a winter health resort for people recovering from illness, prized for clean sea air and a climate gentler than anywhere else on the English coast. Princess Victoria herself stepped ashore there in 1833. It was only in the early 20th century, and especially between the wars, that Torquay turned itself deliberately into a summer holiday resort, and it did so with a specific audience in mind. The Great Western Railway ran an advertising campaign through the 1920s and 1930s built around one idea, that Torquay was England's answer to the French Riviera. Palm trees were planted along the promenade, villas in an Italianate style went up on the hillside, the harbor filled with yachts, hotels like the Grand, the Imperial, Walden Castle, the Roseter, and the Regina positioned themselves not as seaside boarding houses, but as resort hotels, with dining rooms run to a table d'hôte menu, evening dancing at the Marine Spa Ballroom, and an annual Torquay Waiters Race and Queen of the Riviera contest that made the local papers. This was the architecture Margaret Pearson stepped into, not a pier with a variety bill and a penny arcade, but a promenade designed to be walked in one's good clothes, past hotels designed to be recognized by name. Before we go further, if this kind of documentation is what you've been looking for, consider subscribing. Every video on this channel goes into one specific element of the British seaside holiday between 1920 and 1980. The hotel dining room, the promenade, the end of pier show, the express train, the deck chair attendant who knew your family's row, and what each of these things meant to the specific people who organized their year around the fortnight they had booked. Not nostalgia for kiss-me-quick hats. The documented social reality of an institution that gave some British families 2 weeks of not being who they were at home, and made very clear at the same time exactly who it was built for. Accessible line. Insert here. If you or your family took a holiday like this, or one very different from it, put it in the comments. Resort, question, insert here. History, hook, 1 sentence. Back to the terrace. What did a resort built this deliberately for one kind of family require of the families who wanted to be seen using it? What Margaret Pearson expected the Roseter to give her was not, in the end, the sea. Edgbaston had no sea, but that was not the point. What she expected was something more specific. A fortnight in which someone else decided the menu, cleared the table, and made up the bed, and in which she was, formally, a guest rather than the person managing the household. The dining room at 7 was not a restaurant to her in the ordinary sense. It was the meal she had not planned, bought for, or prepared in a chair with her name attached to a booking made the previous autumn. This is the specific thing the middle-class hotel holiday was built to supply. And it is worth being precise about what it was not. It was not rest in any passive sense. Margaret still dressed for dinner, still managed a small girl on a beach, still wrote the thank you letters when they got home. It was the removal of one particular kind of labor, the daily, invisible, repeated work of running a household done by someone else, for a fee in a building designed to make that exchange feel like hospitality rather than a transaction. The roaster's staff, the waiter who remembered her preference for lemon rather than milk, the chambermaid who turned down the beds, were doing paid work that Margaret at home did unpaid. The promenade did something related but distinct. It gave her somewhere to walk with, know where she was required to be, past the palm trees, past the other hotels, in view of people who might recognize her from Birmingham, in clothes chosen for exactly that possibility. Edgbaston had pavements. It did not have a promenade, because a promenade is not a pavement with a sea view. It is a stage built for a specific kind of unhurried, observed leisure, and Torquay had built one of the best examples of it in England. What did it cost, in money and in social positioning, to be the kind of family who could book that table in November and be recognized walking that promenade in June? And what happened to the families for whom that particular door did not open at all? To understand what choosing Torquay meant, it helps to put it next to what choosing Blackpool meant, because the two resorts were never competing for the same holiday maker. Blackpool built itself around the Golden Mile, the pleasure beach, and boarding house streets that could sleep an entire mill town in the same fortnight. Noisy, communal, unmistakably working class, and proud of it. Torquay built itself around clifftop hotels, formal gardens, a quieter promenade, and a climate advertised as continental. One resort was designed to be shared loudly with the whole street back home. The other was designed to be mentioned more quietly at the right moment. This was not accidental. It was documented policy on both sides. Resort corporations and hoteliers in the south of England marketed deliberately to what contemporary writers called a superior class of visitor, lengthening their seasons and pricing their hotels to keep out exactly the kind of holiday maker Blackpool was built to welcome. A family that went to Torquay in the 1950s was not simply choosing a warmer beach. They were choosing to be the kind of family whose neighbors would understand, without being told directly, roughly what a Torquay fortnight cost and roughly what sort of household could afford one. For the Pearsons, this mattered in a specific and ordinary way. Geoffrey Pearson's position at the bank was itself a middle-class position, newly and not entirely securely held. His own father had been a clerk, not a manager. A Torquay holiday, mentioned at the golf club or over the garden fence, did some of the same work that the car in the drive and the daughter's private school did. It was evidence, not spoken evidence. Nobody at the Rose Tour announced their income at dinner, but evidence all the same. Read off the postmark on a postcard, the hotel notepaper used for a thank you letter, the specific way a person said the word Torquay rather than Blackpool when asked where they'd been. What did the family who went to Margate one year and stretched uncomfortably to Eastbourne or Torquay the next actually believe they were purchasing? And what happened when the neighbors could not, in fact, be fooled? The Rose Tour's front door opened for the Pearsons because they had booked, paid, and looked, on arrival, like the kind of family the hotel had built its dining room and its price list to serve. It is documented, nationally, and without a single exception in the historical record, that this door did not open on the same terms for everyone who could have afforded to walk through it. Through the 1950s and into the 1960s, it was entirely legal in Britain for a hotel, boarding house, or guest house to refuse a room on the basis of race. No colored men, no blacks, and similar notices were displayed openly in the windows of hotels and lodging houses across the country, not as an aberration, but as an accepted, unremarked feature of the accommodation market. There was no law against it until the Race Relations Act of 1965, and even that act, in its first form, did not cover housing or accommodation directly. That protection did not arrive fully until the Race Relations Act of 1968. This channel has found no surviving record, naming a specific Torquay hotel that turned away a specific Black or Asian family in this period, and it will not invent one. What can be stated and must be stated is the documented national pattern. A West Indian or Asian family with the exact income of the Pearsons, arriving at a comparable English resort hotel in the exact same decade, could not assume that money and correct dress would be enough. The color bar operated at the front desk as reliably as the booking ledger did. This is not a separate story from Margaret Pearson's terrace. It is the other half of the same institution. The Rose Tour's dining room worked for Margaret precisely because it had been built to recognize certain kinds of family on site and admit them without question. The same recognition system, operating in exactly the same hotels in exactly the same years, was built to recognize other kinds of family and refuse them. Sometimes with a printed sign, sometimes simply with a claim that the hotel was, that week, unfortunately full. What did it mean that the English Riviera's reputation for gentility rested, in practice, on a door that was never open to everyone with the fare for the Torquay Express? Mrs. Iris Trewin, the name used here for the documented type of Torquay hotel housekeeper recorded in period hotel trade accounts and social histories of English resort service work, had been running the Rose Tour's housekeeping since before the war. She knew, by the second or third year of a family's booking, which room they would ask for, what time the children needed breakfast, and which guest would complain about a draft before they had finished unpacking. Margaret Pearson did not know Mrs. Trewin's surname. Mrs. Trewin knew a great deal about the Pearsons that Margaret had never told her directly, which she read off unpacked suitcases, overheard remarks, and the particular anxiety of a family 2 years into a social class they had not been born to. Torquay's summer season ran roughly from Whitsun to early September. A shorter, more concentrated window than Blackpool's, but one on which the town depended almost entirely for its year's income. The waiters who ran in the annual waiters' race, the deck chair attendants along the promenade, the boatmen who took hotel guests out into the bay, the staff of the marine spa ballroom. All of them were, in effect, seasonal workers whose entire livelihood turned on 11 or 12 weeks of a summer that either filled the hotels or did not. A hotel manager watching August bookings in any given year was watching, in miniature, the entire town's economic prospects for the following winter. This produced a specific kind of intimacy, seen from the service side rather than the guest side. The staff at a hotel like the Rose Tour came to know their regular families with a precision the families rarely suspected. Not out of warmth alone, though warmth was often genuinely there, but because a repeat booking was the single most valuable thing a resort hotel could secure. And knowing a guest's habits was how you kept them coming back in November when the booking letter arrived. What did Mrs. Trewin see in the fortnight she managed for the Pearson family every June that Margaret Pearson never once suspected was being watched? If the daytime fortnight belonged to the promenade and the beach, the evening belonged to something more deliberately arranged. At Torquay, that meant an evening at the marine spa ballroom, or a dinner and dance at the hotel itself, or, on the right night, a variety bill at the Pavilion Theatre on the harbour side. For families like the Pearsons, this was the one evening of the fortnight that required real preparation. The good dress packed specifically for it, a hairdresser's appointment booked in advance, Geoffrey in a dinner jacket he otherwise wore twice a year at home. The Pavilion, opened in 1911 on reclaimed land at the harbour's edge, gave Torquay a theatre building of genuine architectural ambition. Domed, ornamented, built to be photographed, not merely used. Its programming through the interwar and postwar decades ran to orchestral concerts, touring reviews, and seasonal variety bills that were, by design, a notch more polished than the broad end of pier comedy found at working-class resorts further north. A comedian at Blackpool's Central Pier worked to make a Milltown audience laugh at itself. A comedian on a Torquay bill worked more carefully to make a professional class audience laugh without ever feeling laughed at. This mattered because the audience itself was part of the evening's performance. Being seen at the Pavilion, in the right seats, in the right clothes, applauding at the right moments, was as much the point as anything on the stage. Children who had spent the day with buckets and spades were handed to a hotel-arranged sitter so their parents could be that audience for one evening. It was the single occasion in the Torquay fortnight when the entire apparatus of the holiday, the hotel, the dress, the booking made months ahead, pointed toward one specific, dressed, observed hour. What did the Wednesday evening at the Pavilion give the Torquay fortnight that the dining room and the promenade, for all they provided, could not? And what happened to that particular kind of evening once package holidays offered guaranteed sun without requiring anyone to own a dinner jacket at all? The first mass market package holidays to Spain launched in 1962, and by the mid-1960s, the arithmetic that had governed families like the Pearsons for a generation had begun, quietly, to invert. A fortnight in a Spanish hotel with guaranteed sun, A pool and the flight included could now be booked for a price that matched and would soon undercut a fortnight at a first-class Torquay hotel with no guarantee of sun at all. The brochures that began arriving through travel agents in Birmingham and every other English city did not need to argue very hard. They had the weather on their side, and increasingly, they had the price on their side too. Torquay did not collapse overnight. Its visitor numbers, in fact, peaked in the 1970s at more than 12 million tourist nights a year, and the town spent that decade marketing itself harder than it ever had before. But the character of who was booking and why had already begun to shift. The comfortable assumption that a Torquay fortnight signaled something specific about a family's position, the assumption the Pearsons had quietly relied on for 2 decades, was harder to sustain once a family with a smaller income than theirs could book a week in Mallorca and come home with a suntan the Rose Tour's climate had never reliably delivered. By the early 1970s, the resort's own reputation had begun to turn publicly and comically against it. In 1970, a company of comedians staying at Torquay's Gleneagles Hotel found the manager so memorably difficult that one of them, John Cleese, built an entire television character out of him. Fawlty Towers, broadcast from 1975, was fiction. But the audience that laughed at it recognized the type of hotel and the type of town it was laughing at without needing it explained. What did the Spanish package holiday actually replace? And what, in the same transaction, did it never once claim to offer? By 1974, Margaret Pearson's own daughter, grown now, married, with children of her own, booked a fortnight in a self-catering apartment on the Costa Blanca instead of a room at the Rose Tour. The apartment had a shared pool, a balcony with a sea view better than anything Torquay's harbor could offer, and a price that made the Rose Tour's tariff card look, for the first time in the family's memory, expensive rather than aspirational. She sent her mother a postcard. It was warm every day, she wrote. The children were brown as berries. What the Costa Blanca apartment did not have was a dining room where a waiter remembered, without being told, that she liked lemon rather than milk. It did not have a housekeeper who had watched 3 generations of the same family arrive every June and knew, before they said a word, roughly how the year at home had gone. It did not have a promenade built specifically to be walked in good clothes past people who might recognize you, because there was no comparable you to be recognized by on a Spanish apartment complex built for holidaymakers from a dozen different English towns who had never met and would not meet again. The apartment gave the family son certainty and a genuinely lower price. It had never claimed to give them anything else, and it never needed to. If this channel is going to keep documenting what the British seaside holiday was and what it meant to the people who shaped their year around it, subscribe. There are more hotels, more promenades, more Wednesday evenings, more express trains, and more housekeepers who knew which room you preferred before you asked. Accessible line. Closing variant. What the Rose Tour's dining room gave Margaret Pearson in June 1953, the Costa Blanca balcony was never built to provide, and it never pretended otherwise. And if you have a resort of your own, a hotel, a promenade, a pier, a fortnight, put it in the comments. Resortad question, closing variant. History, hook, closing variant. The Rose Tour stopped taking summer bookings in the late 1980s and became, for a time, a block of holiday flats. What Torquay's brochures had promised in the 1930s, palm trees, a gentler climate, hotels that knew your name, was real, and it was genuinely valuable to the families who could reach it. What it had also always been was a door that opened for some families and not others, in a way the town's advertising never once mentioned. The promenade is still there. The palm trees are still there. The dining room where Margaret Pearson did not cook a single meal for a fortnight, every June closed its doors for the last time. Quietly. In a decade, nobody thought to record precisely, because by then, nobody at the Rose Tour was keeping the kind of ledger that would have told you.